This is Agronomy Moment. I'm Wendell Cohen. Good day, everybody. This is a podcast here in 2022, really kind of the first one of the season. Call it, I guess, Season 2, Episode 1. First of all, I'd like to start out with a special announcement. Scott has expanded his role there at Beck's Hybrids. He is called a RAM. That is not a truck. It is a Regional Agronomy Manager. Be covering Scott, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, and the agronomists.
Southwest Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska.
Yep, and the agronomists that are inside those regions.
Yep, 6 eventually.
So anyway, congratulations on your role there.
Thank you.
The other thing we're going to talk about today is a couple things, is plot projects in 2022, what we're planning on doing out here, and then we're going to kind of, at the end of this, all talk about a herbicide plan for 2022. A successful plan. As we know, with rising prices in everything, to be honest, and herbicides availability, there's questions, people are asking what's happening.
And things are changing every day in that regard on
There
supply.
is. I'm seeing bits of news bites here and there of stuff going on, and so it's something we need to keep our eyes and ears peeled for what's happening. So we're going to kind of dive into that a little bit at the end, kind of some ways to make it successful, and maybe also point you to some references too if you want to dive deeper into some of that. So with that, we'll start off with our Agronomy Project 2022, corn population comparisons. What's going on here?
Well, last year we looked at a couple hybrids that had significant difference in their ability to flex, and we thought that was a fairly interesting study, and want to repeat that just for demonstration purposes, allow people to see how architecture changes within hybrids based on the populations you plant them at, both in plant and ear structures.
And comparing the different characteristics of maybe a more flexible ear versus semi-flex. And I know I've gotten interest in that. I've had people reach out to me through social media and stuff asking, are you going to take this to yield? And are you going to do something with it? And last year I didn't feel comfortable with what we had. We didn't have enough of a broad spectrum. We were just doing it from a physical look. But I think this year we're going to try to make an attempt to put it across a broader spectrum so we can see it across the field, maybe with a planter, and compare these hybrids at different pops. And we might start down in the teens, right? I think we did last year.
We did last year on that demonstration. Also within our agronomy trialing, we're actually planning to look at 4 of our existing hybrids, newer products in our lineup, and look at whatever the population is of the field, and then doing a plus 4,000, minus 4,000 study on some key hybrids so that we can gain a little better placement information on these hybrids and their ability to tolerate different populations with actual yield data.
And I think as we go into the future, we're seeing some more of those flexible ear products coming on, those genetics, and I think it's important to understand the differences regarding these products so we're placing them like on the right type of ground first, and then adjusting the pops accordingly.
Well, and their ability to, maybe we can run them at a slightly lower pop on that tough acre, where they'll be able to excel in a stressful year. But if we have a good year, like we've had rainfall-wise for the last few years, allow them to pick up the pace and bring more yield with more flex.
Absolutely.
Just let them adapt to the environment utilizing that type of ear.
I think it's going to be a good study. I'm going to be very interested in, and even to watch the characteristics through the year, because it's very interesting to watch those flex ears stretch out. Corn depth comparison, what do we like to, we've tried this for a couple years now, right? And we're going to do it again.
Right. So when we look at our PFR studies, we continue to find that 2 inches is the ideal depth to plant corn. And, there's some definite corn developmental reasons in terms of root structures. And, maybe one of these days, if we continue to show the shallow depth, we'll see some of the negatives associated with shallow planting. And so that's kind of some of it's just more of training purposes and making sure people have a great understanding. Because in the spring, that's one of our number one questions for both soybean and corn is what is the appropriate planting depth? And for corn, we're looking at 2 inches, soybeans 1.5 inches based on our research as the ideal depth for both of those crops. And when we get outside of those ranges, we can have detrimental impact. And we see in our PFR research a very significant change in yield based on planting depth. And so we try to continue to demonstrate why it's important to hit that 2 inch for corn, 1.5 inches for soybean.
Absolutely. Population on soybeans. I love this one.
Well, soybeans are amazingly adaptable, and as long as you have a uniform stand, you can get down to some very, very low populations and still maximize yield. And I think that varies though, even between varieties. You have your thinner line varieties versus bushier types, and it was amazing last year in some of our tours. We would have low pot planted soybeans versus high, and ask people to tell us which was planted which. And most of the time the answers were opposite of the way they should have been.
Yes.
And so it's interesting to look at soybeans and how they adapt in terms of stem diameters, plant height, and bushiness based on their seeding
Yeah,
rate.
that's what's so interesting is watch the different changes that bean takes as you pack it in and as you back it off. And sometime we may release, Gavin, our agronomist here at Topac, has done an in-depth study with that last year, what we did last year, and we may present that at some point. But I'm very interested to keep moving because I think forward with this project like that, because I think it's important to see stuff year over year over year, because, you know, as we know in Missouri, weather plays an important factor on what we're deciding. Yeah, and planting day, and what we're deciding how heavy we need to run the planter, because it does make a difference.
Yep.
Planting day in corn and soybeans, if it works, because we can't control that altogether either.
And you know, when we look at our PFR information, there is a significant difference in ROI by planting date.
Yep.
And especially with soybeans, you know, we tend to plant those late in Missouri for obvious reasons with the harsh conditions we can tend to put our soybeans through in terms of drought.
Yep.
However, if we have that soil, that field that has better water holding, or if it's pivot, there's a significant advantage to early planting. And we want to do a little bit of research in our agronomy trials this year on soybean planting date as well, especially corn, a little more broad ranging. You know, we start in, you know, I'm going to say maybe we start in March this year, as dry as we are. But typically that month of April, if you can plant corn through the month of April, even into the first week of May, there's not a huge difference in yield potential. But typically I like earlier the better for our world due to that potential for drought.
And back on the soybean side there, you were saying far as if you have water and so on, so what's your thoughts too? Just talk a little bit about this planting the soybeans early, as in maybe a dryland situation. Is there anything to know about that?
Well, we have to be careful that, you know, especially if we take an early variety and plant it early, they may be ending their life cycle, moving through reproductive growth while we're in the heat of the drought. And if we abort all those pots, then we don't have a recovery period. So lots of things to get into with that, and it's kind of a fun discussion. And I think it's pretty nice to be able to demonstrate that, but sometimes we don't get the weather to help us do the demo. And so maybe this year we will. And that's why I think it's kind of fun to continue some of these types of trials.
Yep, absolutely. And hail simulation.
You know,
what have we done on that?
We've demoed the corn for a couple of years now, utilizing the weed eater to batter the tatter and batter the corn up a little bit based on growth stage. And I think it's going to be fun this year to do some demonstrations in soybean with hail, utilizing clippers. You know, we won't tatter them. I don't know that beans will tolerate that tattering and beating that corn can. I might have said that wrong. Soybeans won't handle that as well as corn will. But if we can go in at, say, a V4 soybean and clip off different nodes and show the bean's ability to recover, you know, starting at below the cotyledons, which we know won't recover, to just above the cotyledons and then on up, and show their ability to bush out from that point. It's pretty nice to see that.
Interesting, yeah. And maybe even see what happens if there's one cotyledon left or something.
Right. Take pictures through the season and watch them recover.
More of a physical look at what happens there. So. Also, there's another thing we may do as a corn seed response to cold water or cold rain imbibition. What happens when sometimes, I think every year in some place of the state, we get corn seed that gets the cold water imbibition, and it's all about the timing of the rain versus the planting and how much rain falls before the rain ends because the cold front passes through. But somewhere it seems like there's always a band somewhere where we get the corkscrewing and things like that.
Well, there's that critical period. You know, is it 12 hours? Is it 24 hours from when you plant to when the chilling occurs?
How deep is the corn? Like, how much,
and that varies
how long does
year
it take the water to go down to percolate? If the soil is tight, is it loose? I think that'll make some difference, doesn't it?
It does. But as long as we know that there's some critical period, and typically we're going to say 24 hours. Sometimes it can be a little shorter than that. If you don't get cold in that period, you're going to tend to be okay. But that's not a silver bullet. Absolutely. And I think just being able to demonstrate what can happen, if we have I think the bottom line is to keep in mind your forecast. If you have a forecast that says you have a day before the cold rain occurs, you're going to usually be okay, but maybe not always. And trying to demonstrate what happens when we don't allow for that critical period to occur.
It helps everyone to understand the risks, because that's what it's all about. Farming's about managing it.
And it might be fun to demo beans too in the same type of a situation, because sometimes we get the feel that maybe beans tolerate that. In some cases a little better. And last year we had some folks planting some beans in February and March, and they all emerged. But then we got the frost, cold, and killed them all. So they did tolerate the cold soils very well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting because I think we've been thinking about doing that. For those of you who don't know, we have an old freezer that's been refurbished into a frost simulator with certain thermostats and timers and a grow light, and we're able to maintain any temperature we want, and also we can take it down to whatever we want at certain times and do frost tests and things. So we'll see what all happens with that. Other opportunities you can think about from like weather, environmental, things we might do in season?
Every year something comes up that's a target of opportunity agronomically, and I think if we keep an open mind and a willingness to adapt, we'll find some other things to look at as well through the summer. So,
all right, then I'm going to shift on to our herbicide thing and see what we have for a successful herbicide program in 22. Had some questions I wanted to ask you. To be successful in 22 in weed control, what's your thoughts on some things we need to look at differently in past years?
well, you know, we can sit here and try to think. There are some basics we always have to follow, and can we change those? I think that would be potentially risky. You know, especially you look at the pictures you have up there on the wall there, especially some of the fields we have with the weed pressures we have, and to try to. I realize there's a lot of costs that have gone through the roof this year. However, there are some things we have to do to ensure success. Because if we don't do them, if we try to save ourselves into a successful year, that's typically when we fail.
Sure.
And so when I think of weed control in particular, making sure we have a good base down that has multiple modes of action that are effective on the primary weed species we have. And that's the power in the pre that we talk about all the time at Beck's. And you know, when you look at some fields, maybe like the one in the bottom right there, those are probably candidates for utilizing pre-planting and then coming in 21 to 25 days later, even if there's not a lot of pressure, making another residual application of an effective herbicide.
Because the weed bank's there.
Right. And, you know, there's lots of things to consider. I know you've done some meetings locally around here with your customers, but a lot of discussion in the last 8 to 10 years that, you know, normally we think of weed competition, we think of weeds competing for light, nutrition, water with our crop. But there's some work that's been done that's demonstrating that even in the absence of those competition factors, by planting a weed in a separate pot from a soybean plant, that we are seeing morphological changes in how the crop grows in response to that presence of the weed. And a lot of that we think is due to, you know, plants tend to absorb red and blue lights very well, but they reflect far red. And if you have a water hemp growing next to a soybean row, it's been shown that even before that soybean plant emerges, it's sensing that far red light being reflected into that plant's zone, and that causes changes in how that soybean grows in terms of its root lengths, rooting, hair roots on corn, things like that. So there's a lot more in-depth communication occurring between crops and weeds that we're just starting to understand. And even in the field like you have on the bottom left,
very little weed pressure, a little bit.
Had those beans been smaller and we had a few scattered weeds, most of the time we're like, hey, that looks pretty good. We're learning that there is some interactions occurring between soybeans and those weeds that are causing yield limitations that they will never fully recover from.
And to be clear on some of the studies they were doing, they were removing the potential of water usage or fertility usage from the weeds.
Totally isolated.
It was isolated. So it was just present.
Communication.
It was simply a physical presence in the room with each other.
Right.
And that was what was causing those stress hormones to explode. And
you get a lot of free radicals developing in the plants. And free radicals are developed by a lot of the herbicides.
And what's a free radical?
It's a highly energetic, typically molecule of oxygen that can punch holes in cells within the plants and just cause they have to go through a lot of work to recover from that presence. And rupturing of cells. And so it's interesting. I think it's just more ammunition to go with the importance of making sure we start off clean. And there is a weed-free period near emergence that's very critical. And that varies, obviously, probably from crop to crop, variety to variety, year to year. But there is that critical period, and anything we can do to ensure we don't hurt ourselves right off the bat will typically result in a better return for our acres if we can take care of that.
How about the history of the field? What does things like maybe the soil fertility make a difference in weed control, or does it matter?
You know, I'm sure there are some differences we could get into. You know, we discussed pH, you and I here a little while earlier, and you know, that I'm sure could have an impact on our crop and the weed's ability to grow most efficiently. But I think more importantly is the impact of things like pH, on the longevity or the half-life of the herbicides we're using. You know, some
Sure.
break down more rapidly.
Yep.
If we're not in the ideal pH, some
Yep.
have a lot longer residual. Like
Sure.
a classic, for example,
Yep.
is one. You know, pH has a major impact on their breakdown, and so I think when I think of crop history, I'm going to be looking more at weed bank,
Okay.
seed bank, tillage.
Yep.
You know, when we till, if we've got a field that hasn't been tilled in 10 years, and then we'd say, for example, we'll go on the extremes and moldboard it, think of the weeds we're exposing to the environment that probably are very susceptible to the herbicides we're using.
1970s cockleburrs or something.
Right. You know, so I mean, there's lots of fun things
Yep.
you can think about there. But bottom line is making sure we go back to the basics, utilizing herbicides with good residual, because any weed that emerges is a weed we have to battle. Any weed we keep from emerging is one that we're obviously not going to have to battle.
Sure.
And so I think making sure we utilize residual products to help us reduce the pressures is the best route still.
Okay. Makes sense. How long?
It's the good basis. It's the foundation.
So you already talked about the weed can grow until it starts to hurt the crop, and you're saying even before emergence, a weed that's up and has a few leaves on it can
It's been
potentially-
demonstrated to cause changes in how that plant, the plant, right as the soybean plant in particular is what
Yep.
we were talking about, hits the soil line.
Yep.
Where maybe it's not emerged yet. Far red light can't penetrate soil very deeply at all. But
Yep.
when that plant is very near emergence, if far red light, if those plants sense that,
Yeah.
it causes them to change how they grow, shortening their roots, reducing root hairs,
and then how
elongating
about
stems.
what if we come in there about a week earlier, or even a day earlier, and we kill the weeds, but the chlorophyll is still green? Is there still reflectance of far red light at that point? Or
You're getting pretty deep on my knowledge there.
I know. I was thinking about sometimes there is that practice of maybe even a week ahead of time, and then everything. Let's say it's all white and brown. You did it with a gramoxone or like a Sharpen or something, and it smoked it white.
That would be good.
That would be okay.
Yeah, that'd be okay there. Now I'd have to dig into say you use a growth regulator
Yes.
to kill in a burn down mode,
Yes.
and you still have green tissue.
Yeah.
If they're starting to wilt down already, I would assume that you're in pretty good
You're
situation
improving
there.
every day. Things
But
are improving.
I'd have to get back to you on true
Yeah.
answer to that, because I don't know that I know that for sure.
And I didn't either. It's just a question I
Yeah.
was thinking of, and I was like, I wonder how. Well, but if it's white tissue out there and it's dead,
Brown.
it's not reflecting
right.
the light, and
It'd be changed the wavelength. It'd be far better situation than having actively growing.
Absolutely.
I guess that's the bottom line. Is even a wilting down weed that may still be green
Yes.
wouldn't be
It's better than
as
a live-
negative as a actively growing healthy one.
So I'm going to go back to that, is that every day things are getting better. If you've killed it and it's dying, it's wilting, it's going down, things are.
That's a good thing in my
Yeah.
opinion. But
I mean, finally, at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. Is if
Right.
you got a weed and you're going to plant tomorrow, maybe spray it today.
yeah, we're
Maybe
getting out there pretty
answers it.
far on in regards to the total perfect answer for you on the video today.
Well,
but
but going back to the thing of just going to think about it from a planting situation.
Right.
I'm trying to make a decision, and I'm trying to decide, should I plant today or what? Maybe spray. If there's some weeds out there, maybe spray. And
Yeah.
because you're better off to spray today, let it sit 24 hours, and then go and plant.
Yeah,
Because your weed's starting to wilt then.
you know, when you think about time to emerge, I mean, we're
Yeah.
probably in pretty good shape
Yeah.
anyway most of the time if
Exactly.
you're spraying near planting.
Yeah. Sometimes I know that's been a question for us. We
Right.
realize, it's not terrible dirty. Maybe we should just plant.
You look at some of the fields we have to deal with the weather we've had the last few years, and that's definitely a legitimate question.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
so
Anyway, enlist label. For those that are still wanting to plant enlist or are doing that, as you all know, the enlist label has changed. There's some differences. In some counties, like the one in Vernon and Bates, it's banned.
some Kansas counties,
Some Kansas counties.
Nebraska, lots of big zones in the
Yeah.
U.S. About 2% of the acres, I believe, is what it affects. They have a ban on the utilization of the 2,4-D products.
And then there's
Enlist products.
there's also those of you listening that are in counties where you can still spray it, but there's also restrictions now. So any thoughts down that line?
Well, there's definitely some restrictions that have been put in place to help reduce the potential for groundwater contamination with 2,4-D. So like restrictions on if there's rainfall forecasted to occur within 48 hours of application, you can no longer apply. Can't irrigate within 48 hours of application. There's a restriction on, we used to be able to go through R2, now it's through R1 with the applications of the Enlist products. So I think if you're utilizing the Enlist as a post-application treatment, make sure you're very up to date on the changes that have occurred with the labels and see some of the restrictions that have been put in place on its application.
Yep. I don't know if I have a lot more today on our podcast, but I did want to point everyone to the successful herbicide program 2022. Luke Schulte a while ago put out a proactive approach to overcome supply challenges. It was a webinar in December. It's been recorded. You can watch it with the link up there. You're not going to be able to obviously copy that link, but I can send it to you. And you can go on and watch it, or you can call me up and come down and we'll watch it here. I really advise watching this one. It's very informative.
So Luke's one of our agronomists from Ohio, and he's our herbicide specialist, one of our herbicide specialists, and he's outstanding. Does a great job of delivering information related to herbicide weed control. He
dives deeper into this far red light topic on with weeds and the responsive crop, and goes through even some of the yield losses that occur from that. And then as well as maybe some of the cost savings. I'm finding maybe a lesser herbicide program versus maybe a more expensive one, but one that's effective, and some of the costs that can happen.
And also digging into some other options in light of the supply shortages we have on some of the post products that are out there.
I think it's a very I'm going to highly recommend watching that one. Reach out, we'll get it to you, or come down, we'll watch it here. And anything else before we wrap up?
No, just, here we are on the 15th of February. We could be planting within a month in some places.
And I've been telling people is that, and when it gets to be February, I'm in March mode already, because I'm thinking I'm already scared, and I'm like, we're going to be ready.
Hopefully it'll start raining a little bit here and slow us down, but not too much, so that we can plant into some dry soils for once.
It'd be beautiful to plant into some perfect conditions into March.
When's the last time that happened?
Not hardly in my memory.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. I've farmed about 10 years. But I think there was one or two times.
We did have a couple, but nothing perfect.
No.
I want a 2014 perfect planting season.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, thanks again for watching, folks. Have a good day.
Thank you.
If you need help with your operation, go to topagservices.com/signups to receive alerts. This is Agronomy Moment. Hey, this is Wendell Cohen, show host and producer. Thank you to all those who made this show possible. This show is over. See ya.